The sexual assault accusations against Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh started a national conversation about the reliability of past memories. In a recent New York Times op-ed, a Weill Cornell psychiatrist writes, quote, "Neuroscience research tells us that memories formed under the influence of intense emotion are indelible in the way that memories of a routine day are not." Kavanaugh has denied all allegations of sexual assault. Dr. Ted Huey is a professor of psychiatry and neurology at Columbia University. He joins us to explain how the memory works and the impact of trauma. Good morning to you, Dr. Huey.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
We're glad you're here. Help us understand this, because what does the research show when it comes to memory and trauma?
Well, I agree with the doctor that you had just mentioned there. There's a misconception that emotion and trauma is bad for memory, that you don't remember things in those situations, when actually the way our brain tags what's important to be remembered is emotion. And actually the hippocampus and amygdala, two areas involved in memory and emotion, are very close to each other. And it's your brain's way of saying, this is very important, remember it. And so, you know, as an example of that, you probably couldn't tell me what you were doing the morning of September 8th, 2001, but I'm sure you could tell me what you were doing the morning of September 11th, 2001, which was a very emotionally charged day for all of us.
Can two people be at the same, have the same incident, but have different memories and both be telling the truth?
Very much so. So, you know, just as the example I gave you, a non-emotional or non-emotionally charged incident is less memorable usually. And so if two people come into a situation and for one it's a very emotionally charged event, for the other person it's not, often you'll get a situation years later where the person for whom it was a charged event will say, well, I remember that day vividly or that event vividly, and the other person will say, I have no memory of that.
Doctor, can you tell us what's happening in the brain during one of these emotionally charged moments, literally what's happening?
So yes, so your amygdala, which is a structure that's very important for emotional processing, is telling your hippocampus, flag this. This is important, you know, so that we can hopefully, you know, ideally, evolutionarily avoid this situation in the future. So it's being flagged as a very important thing. Now, at the same time, when you're in a highly emotional state, you're not sitting calmly, rationally saying, well, I'm going to remember this and I'm going to remember that. So what you end up happening is this situation, which is often described by trauma survivors or people after very emotional events, where they have very vivid memories, but strange memories. So they'll say,
like what?
I remember the sweater my attacker was wearing, but I can't remember his face, or, you know, or I remember, you know, the smell, but I don't remember the make of the car. And that's because even though the memories are very vivid and your memory is actually turned up very high, you know, to remember events, you're not kind of thinking calmly and rationally about what I should remember and what I shouldn't remember.
And
so,
how reliable is the memory after a traumatic event decades later?
Yeah, and that's a question that's obviously come up a lot. And, you know, I think one principle about that is it's hard to give a kind of blanket reliability. So what the research shows is that that it matters kind of what you're talking about. So that, you know, more peripheral memories might be misremembered as the decades go on, but usually the core is remembered pretty well. So an example would be if you're mugged, you might kind of misremember whether it was on 61st Street or 62nd Street if I asked you 20 years later. You're not going to forget that you were mugged. So, you know, so when you talk about an accuracy of an old memory, what are you talking about? Are you talking about the core event, or are you talking about the kind of more peripheral?
And you would remember it better, especially if you told that story over and over again over the years.
That's true, although, you know, you have to be careful of that, because memory, you know, another misconception people have is that memory is like a videotape. Really all memory, whether traumatic memory or non-traumatic memory, are fragments, are pieces we remember, and then we kind of turn it into a narrative afterwards. Sometimes that narrative can have inaccuracies that then become, through repeated retelling, kind of embedded. But you know, usually the elements of it are the memories we use to structure that memory.
Really interesting.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Very.
Thank you for having me.
No, thank you. We appreciate that.
Yeah.